Morning, everybody. Bodhisattvas everywhere. This is wonderful. Hello to you, home too, or wherever you are. This is the celestial Bodhisattvas. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. You know, I don't have a loud voice, and I'll start out, and then so just give me a wave. Or one of those. Yes, thank you. Already. All right. So hi. I'm going to talk today. Can you guess what I'm going to talk about today? Talking about practicing with Bodhisattvas, and I brought in some of my friends along with me. And also some Bodhisattvas from Australia that you may recognize. So Bodhisattva. Bodhi means enlightenment or awakening, and sattva means being. So a bodhisattva is an enlightening being or an awakening being. And they are mythic beings, they're sort of archetypes that express the best qualities of humans. They've been practicing for eons. They've been practicing for kalpas, which just means a very, very long time. And they could become enlightened and become Buddhas, but they have chosen to stay here in this world to free all beings. So they take that vow. They put off enlightenment to help all of us. The verse that we chant on Sunday mornings after the talk is the Bodhisattva vow, and it's printed on the front of our bulletin, so we're going to be chanting it later. So it goes, beings are numberless, vowing to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, vowing to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, vowing to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, vowing to become it. So you might think those are impossible vows, but I like what Tim said about them one time. He said, they're not impossible, they're just inconceivable. And it's true. But no matter how far away or no matter how impossible they might seem, as aspiring bodhisattvas ourselves, that's our aim. So bodhisattvas, some of them are based on historical figures, people who really lived, but most of them are kind of like inspirational figures or protectors or guides, show like folklore sort of. We can think of them as these sort of inspirational figures that demonstrate different ways to make the world a better place. We can also think of them as awakened qualities within ourselves. And once you know a little bit about some of the qualities of bodhisattvas, you might notice them manifested in the people around you. I see bodhisattvas all the time. So this morning, I want to introduce you to 5 of the most widely recognized bodhisattvas. I'm going to spend a few minutes on each one of them, describing a little bit about their history and what their names mean, and then some details about their statues. I'm an old Catholic girl, so I really like statues. Buddhists and Catholics and Hindus all really like statues. So I've got 2 down and 1 to go. So anyway, and I'll also give some examples of historical people or people in stories that may represent that particular bodhisattva sort of energy. And see if any of them resonate with you. Sometimes you'll just recognize one. I know that one, or that, that's me. That's me. So we can talk about that at the end if you want. So my go-to source for information about bodhisattvas is this book by Taigen Leighton. It's called Faces of Compassion. Classic Bodhisattva Archetypes and Their Modern Expression. It's a wonderful book. The book cover shows a face that's one half of the face is Bodhisattva, and the other half of the face is a human being. And I think that the Bodhisattva is unaware that she's also human, and the human face doesn't know that she's a Bodhisattva. But they're both beautiful. So it's my favorite Buddhist reference book. It's the only one that I ever pick up just for fun. Just kind of open it to a page and you'll find something amazing. Ooh, that's a good one. Reaching back at midnight, 1,000 flowing hands and eyes calmly bear all clouds and share their pillow with myriad beings. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Let's see what else. No, not. So, Bodhisattva. So in the book, he one of the things that he does is he will cite famous people who, as examples of the of each Bodhisattva archetype, and he makes it clear in the book. So I want to make that clear today that he's not, when he does that or when I do that, we're not saying that the people are Bodhisattvas or flawless, but they're used as examples to show certain qualities of the Bodhisattva. And those examples were helpful to me because it kind of brings it down from the air into the real world. If you can imagine what it would be like if a Bodhisattva were to walk in the room. That's Jesus. I know you. So I'm going to talk about 5 Bodhisattvas today. Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of enlightened activity. Avalokiteshvara or Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Thank you. And Jizo Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of women and travelers and people who are in particularly difficult situations. And Maitreya Bodhisattva, who's in line to become the next one in a long line of Buddhas. So Shakyamuni Buddha is the Buddha of the current era. And there were Buddhas before Shakyamuni, and there will be Buddhas after Shakyamuni. And Maitreya is the next one coming up. So we're going to start with Manjushri Bodhisattva, who's the Bodhisattva of supreme wisdom and insight. And this is Manjushri Bodhisattva. And you'll often see Manjushri on the main altar in Buddhist temples. And for years, Manjushri was on the altar when the Zendo was across the way. And when we renovated the building, we got a donation of a number of really beautiful statues. And so we decided to put this one on the altar in here. And this one is actually sort of a combination of the best qualities of all Bodhisattvas. And we didn't know about this, but Ted emailed the curator for Asian art at the Art Institute and said, can you tell who this is? Because we couldn't put it together. And he said sometimes the artisans would just make a statue that kind of combined the qualities of all of them. So this is everybody's Bodhisattva. But Manjushri is usually depicted sitting on a lion. And his name means noble, gentle one. And the lion represents the wisdom that you need to tame your mind. Usually or often, ours is just sitting there, the cosmic mudra, but often you'll see one that's holding a scroll or sutra to demonstrate, knowledge and the lore. Sometimes, often you'll see one wielding a giant sword, and they're a little terrifying, I think. But the sword is there to show the way that Manjushri uses that sword to cut through delusion. to cut through delusion. And one source said that he can use the sword to cut things in two or to cut things in one. And that really stuck with me because I have no idea what it means. But I think it would be a wonderful koan. If you like to play with koans, that would be one to sit with. So he represents that kind of deep meditative introspection that comes from many long years of meditation, meditative inquiry. So he sees into the essence of things, cuts off the distractions and delusions, and gets to the heart of the matter. He embodies concentration and that wisdom that comes long kalpas of meditation practice. So when he's on the altar, he's encouraging us in our meditation, and he's demonstrating that the fruits of the practice are there, we stick with it. So one of the examples that Taigen gives in his book of Manjushri is the Hans Christian Andersen story. Do you remember the story about the emperor's new clothes? Right? So the emperor, so there's this really vain emperor, and he really likes to adorn his body with fabulous clothes. And one day, a tailor comes into town and tells him, I can make the most beautiful outfit of all, right? And but he's a trickster, and it turns out that he's pretended to make clothes, and he puts them on him and says, oh, you look great, but there's nothing on him, they're just invisible. Right? So the emperor kind of goes strutting down the main street, and all the his subjects are there, and they're all, they're sort of bowing, going, oh, emperor, you look so great. And there he is, he's completely naked. And there's just one little kid in the crowd who isn't shy about pointing out the truth. He goes, Mom, he doesn't have any clothes on. And he's seeing the emptiness, right, of the emperor's pretensions. And Manjushri is like that. He's like that. He sees and he points out the emptiness of all our little fabrications and our beliefs, and he does cut through our illusions. So that's the Bodhisattva of wisdom. We're glad you're here. We're glad you don't have a sword. I'm glad you don't have a sword. The next one I want to talk about is Samantabhadra, who is the Bodhisattva of enlightened activity in the world. And he inspires people by using his wisdom to transform social systems. So he's kind of the big picture, long view sort of Bodhisattva. And he likes to do his work discreetly when he can, but he isn't afraid of putting himself sort of out there and leading the movement for change. His name means universal vow or worthy. And this one belongs to Jackson. This one belongs to Benton Jackson. He's our librarian. He very kindly lent him to us. So he's sitting on a shelf in the library. So Samantabhadra sits on an elephant that has 6 tusks. And he may hold a wish-fulfilling jewel, which is a jewel that will fulfill the wishes of whoever, I don't want to say praise to him, these aren't deities, but whoever asks him, whoever approaches him with a need, the wish-fulfilling jewel will and he also often carries a lotus flower. And Taigen says, Samantabhadra rides majestically on his slow mount, showing a feeling of calm, deliberate activity imbued with clear, considered intention and dignity. That's Samantabhadra. And in the book, Tithing gives a couple of examples of Samantabhadra in the world, one of which is Martin Luther King. You know, he led large movements of people. He had a vision of how the country could be, ought to be, and he would lead large movements of people to make the world a better place for everybody. And it turned out to be a movement that was revolutionary. You know, the powers that be tried to stop him. And sometimes even his colleagues worried that he was going too far, that he was overreaching. But he just pushed ahead with that same kind of calm, steady, deliberate intention and dignity that Samantabhadra shows on the elephant. Another example of Samantabhadra energy would be Martin Luther King's hero, Gandhi. You know, he led these large movements in India. And you can find the essence of Samantabhadra, I think, in Robert Kennedy's saying. Said, some people see things as they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and ask why not. And that's Samantabhadra. The next one I want to talk about is Avalokiteshvara, or Kuan Yin. I almost called this talk What I Did on My Summer Vacation. Because I took a trip down to Kansas City just to see a statue of Avalokiteshvara. I've been wanting to see it for years, and I finally said, why not now? So I went down to Kansas City to the Nelson Atkins Museum, and they have this big statue of Avalokiteshvara. And you walk in and you can see her down, you can see her from 2 rooms away. This is an archway and then another archway. And she's in this big giant room that's made to look like a Chinese temple. And it's just amazing. I sat there for about an hour and just hung out with Avalokiteshvara. Her name means regarder of the cries of the world. And she's the Bodhisattva of compassion. And I say she, but Avalokiteshvara started out as a male figure back in India and early China. And at some point, pretty early on, I think in China, they started paying attention to sort of those warm, kind of nurturing qualities and the compassion, and started depicting her in statues as a she. So sometimes if it's a really old statue or a traditional statue, you'll see Avalokiteshvara as a male figure. And most of the statues that you see that are newer are of a female Avalokiteshvara. So she's called the regarder of the cries of the world because with great equanimity and calmness and compassion, she hears the distress of people and reaches out to help them without any kind of hesitation, or she doesn't think about it. She just reaches out to help. It's like if you burned your arm, your other hand would just reach over to help it. It's like that kind of unthinking, immediate response to what she sees. So at MZMC, we've got Kuan Yin on the kitchen altar, and there's also another Kuan Yin that's in the kitchen, and she's within sight. She's not hidden anywhere. She's not in a cabinet or anywhere, but a lot of people don't see her. She's kind of hidden in the world. But if you go in the kitchen, just look around and you'll go, oh, she's missing, but she's really there. Let's see. So you'll usually see her in 2 poses. Sometimes she's in the pose of the Avalokiteshvara from the Nelson Atkins Museum. So it's called the Royal Eves pose, like this. But most of them, are in one of two poses. They're either standing or sitting. This is a standing Avalokiteshvara, and she's holding a lotus flower. And the meaning of the lotus flower is the symbolism is that it grows out of them. It's a beautiful thing that grows out of the muck and the mud. And it's I think it's a very helpful, it's been a helpful symbol for me. If you're someone who lives with depression, it's a really hopeful thing. Out of all of this misery right now, something beautiful can arise. So this one is carrying the lotus, and she also has a jar that contains nectar or kind of a healing water. And this one, actually, you can see the water coming out of her face. It's a miracle. I found her at a garage sale. And I said, that's my Avalokiteshvara right there. There's a dragon down below. And another way you'll see Avalokiteshvara, there's one called the 1,000-armed Kuan Yin. And this little one has got lots and lots of arms. I can't tell you how many because I always lose track when I try to count. But she's got thousands of arms, and each one holds a tool or an implement. This one's got a bell in one hand, and she's got a flower in another one, and a little can't think of what they're called. Anyway, she has a lot of she's carrying implements to help people. Sometimes she'll have those 1,000 arms, and there'll be an eyeball in each one that she can use to see the suffering of people and know who she needs to help. There's a wonderful drawing. It's in the book. It's by Mayumi Oda, who was the artist who. Do you remember the MZMC T-shirts that had the Bodhisattva sitting on the loon out in the lake? That's who Mayumi Oda. I know. Somebody knew her and asked her to do it. So anyway, there's a picture here of Kuan Yin as the kitchen kanon. Kanon is the Japanese translation. So she's got on a chef's hat, and she's got all these arms, and one of them's holding a whisk, and another one's holding a spatula, and another one's got a frying pan. So there's lots of different versions of them. I saw an actual Avalokiteshvara in the kitchen years ago. I was the tenzo, I was the cook, and I wasn't a very good cook. I wasn't. It didn't come naturally. And we were doing a sesshin, so it's a formal retreat, and the meal has to come out at a particular time. And when the bell rings and the service starts, you've got to have the food ready. And I had just had kind of a rough morning in the kitchen, and I hear the bell ring and I hear the service start, and the food is still in the pots and pans, and things are sort of in an uproar. And that's when I cut my hand. So I cut my hand, and a minute later, in comes the head server, and the head server was Kuan Yin on the hook. She walks into the kitchen and just at a glance takes in what's going on. And there I am, and she gets me a towel and wraps it around my bleeding hand. And she goes and she just very calmly starts putting the food, into the serving dishes. And she gets the servers to come in and help get the implements out and stuff. And she did it just, she was my miracle. She just walked in, didn't think about it, didn't go grab the Tenzo handbook and say, what do I do now? She just. Elizabeth, if you are watching this, it's you and you know it. I'll bet you remember. So the 1,000-armed Bodhisattva and the one who's holding the healing. So we have the one in the kitchen, the two in the kitchen, and we also have two of them out in the backyard. And you'll see them when you're walking on the meditation path. The examples that tithing gives in the book, the first one is His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's actually considered to be a reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. And as part, there's a verse on the front of your bulletin. And this is part of the morning service this private morning service that he does every day. And it goes, may I become at all times, both now and forever, a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick. And now, as long as space endures, as long as there are beings to be found, may I continue likewise to remain to drive away the sorrows of the world. That comes from A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva. And if you decide you want to read the Bodhisattva's Guide to the Way of Life, I recommend Pema Chodron's version. She has this amazing commentary on it. We have a copy of that in the library. We also have a copy of the same. So another example besides the Dalai Lama, the thing about the Dalai Lama is, the thing that you hear from people who met him is that even if you're in a long line and he's going down the receiving line, when he comes to you, you feel like there's nothing else in the world. You feel like he really sees you and he really hears you. Some people just have that kind of quality about them. He's one. He came to town. Well, he's come to town a couple of times, but I went to see him one time. And I heard the story about there were a lot of Tibetan people who were there to see him, of course. And there were some people who were outside who were kind of agitators of one sort. And one of them was sort of doing cat calls and he sort of confronted one of the Tibetan people, the devotees who come to see, their living Bodhisattva. And someone saw what this guy was doing. And so that he just stepped right in between the agitator guy and kind of bowed and said, why don't you come talk to me? And he kind of pulled him aside. So there, there's Avalokiteshvara again, doing that. I don't know that I would have had the wherewithal to do that. I probably would have done some non-Bodhisattva activities. But we did. Another one is Mother Teresa. You always hear about Mother Teresa would, and her nuns would go out into the streets and they would find people who were in like dire circumstances. Sometimes they'd be dying. They'd find them and they would take them back to their place to take care of them. And they wouldn't stop to wonder, is this person, might they be contagious, or how, did they get into this fix because of their bad behavior? Blah, 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 blah. Mother Teresa didn't do that. She would just help. She would just help. And so while Samantabhadra works to do the big, create the big picture change in the world, Avalokiteshvara is the one who just doesn't pay attention to that stuff, just does what needs to be done in this moment. If you've ever worked for a big corporation like I have, Samantabhadra is the strategic one, and Avalokiteshvara is the tactical one. So that's Avalokiteshvara. Then I want to talk about Jizo Bodhisattva. The name originally was Kitishagarva, which I didn't even want to say because I figured I wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't come out of my mouth. But there you have it, Shantideva, Bodhisattva, now known as Jizo. The Jizo is the guardian of women and children and travelers, including beings that are traveling in between the realms. So babies before they're born and after they're born, people who are on the way to dying. Jizo is the Bodhisattva for them. Jizo is also known for benefiting the beings who are in the hell realms. Places of extreme difficulty like war zones, prison camps, and refugee camps. We've got 2 Jizos that I could find at MZMC. One of the 3 Jizos. One of them is in the hallway, but on the main floor between the bathrooms. There's a Jizo there. And there's another one in the 3rd floor room. There's a big giant Buddha, and on one side of him there's a Jizo, and on the other side is Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara. So the one by the bathroom is kind of a traditional pose. He's a monk, and he's got a staff like this. And when he walks through the forest, and he uses a staff that's got rings on the top, and they make a noise so that any animals who are in the way can skitter out of the way, so he doesn't inadvertently step on ones. And it's not part of the loneliness. So there's also one in the memorial garden. Years ago, we had a Sangha member who died in a really tragic accident, and her fiance wanted to make a memorial garden for her. And we were talking about which Bodhisattva statue should go in the garden. And, so I told him about, Manjushri and Samantapadra and Avalokiteshvara. And when I told him about Jizo going into the hell realms to help people, he immediately said, that's the one. That's the one, because she had worked, her career had been as a psychotherapist. And so she had helped people who were really in the hell realms of their heads. So I brought 2 of them from home. This one, this Jizo, this little Jizo, is one that I received for ordination. So I was ordained with 5 women, and the day before our ordination, we got a package here, and it was from Kiran Suna, who was the guiding teacher for Tim. And we opened up the package, and there were 5 individually wrapped gifts, and they didn't have names on them, so we each just picked one. And they were all Jizo statues, and they were made by a friend of Karen's, who at the beginning of the Gulf War took a vow that every day she was going to make a Jizo. Every day. And so this is my Jizo. And I get a little emotional thinking about this Jizo. So this is the Bodhisattva for beings that are in the hell realms, like war zones, and people who have to put up with our country going into war zones that we didn't really need to be. And this little Jizo, I forgot to take his necklace off. He has a necklace that I put on him. So this is a real classical kind of Jizo statue. He's very plain and unadorned, except when he's in my house. And this is the first Jizo that I got. I've been wanting a Jizo statue for a long time. And I just, not looking really carefully, just kind of, one of these days I'm going to find a Jizo. And I went to Buddhist conference. It was a really big Buddhist conference. It was run by Tricycle Magazine, and there were all these famous Buddhist teachers there. It was this huge conference, and it was actually held in the World Trade Center in New York City. And so I'm at this conference, and there's a break, and so I went out and just walked around the neighborhood, and I walked into the store. It was just a little, I don't even remember what kind of store it was, but way in the back in this little alcove, there's this little Jesus. And I went, there you are. I've been looking for you. And it was sitting there waiting for me. And this was in July of 2001. And so it was just 2 months before the towers were attacked. And so when I think about Jesus, my little Jesus, I think about those firefighters who went running into the building to save all those people who are in there terrified, and they're in the hell room, and they went running in, and a lot of them didn't come back home. But that's Jesus Bodhisattva. You're in the hell room. Jesus is there. Teigen gives the example of Doctors Without Borders. Do you know about them? They're Doctors Without Borders. They go into, war zones and refugee camps and places where there's an epidemic going on, but there's no doctors available. That's totally Jesus. That's totally Jesus. Another one is prison chaplains. People like Sister Helen, who would go in and counsel the people on death row. Is Jesus. So that's Jesus. The next one I want to talk about is the final one, is Maitreya Bodhisattva. And he's the future loving kindness Bodhisattva. And his name means loving kindness. Maitreya is the Sanskrit word for loving kindness, and his name is Maitreya. So he's one that may have been based on a historical person. One of Buddha's disciples. The Buddha said Maitreya is the one who's going to become the next Buddha. So some scholars state that as a fact, and others say that it's they're not so sure about it. But according to the story, Buddha saw something in him and predicted he would be the next one. And now sometimes he's referred to now as Maitreya Buddha, because it's going to be the next one. But he's sort of young, and he's full of potential, and he's awaiting his future role as the next Buddha. And we don't know when he's going to come. Could be many kalpas from now. But he's the one who's known to look into the future. You don't see very many statues of him. I don't know why. When you do, sometimes you'll see him as a young person, and he'll be sitting in Amida heaven, and he'll have his hand on his chin, and he's just contemplating. But one emanation of Maitreya that you'll all see is this guy. This one belongs to Ted. Kindly loaned it to me. I don't know if you can see this, but if you ever go into a Chinese restaurant and you see the jolly Buddha who looks like he's had way too much Chinese food, that's Maitreya Bodhisattva. And Hote. And he was actually based on a real person. He was a Chinese monk. And he carried a cloth bag around that was full of toys and candy, and he'd go out and play with the kids, and the kids all loved him. This was my first Bodhisattva statue. He came with no feet. His feet had been broken off. I bought him at a garage sale for $1. And I thought, I didn't study any Buddhism at the time. I just liked it. And I thought he was Buddha. But he is an emanation of Maitreya Bodhisattva. And apparently, when he died, he wrote a death poem that expressed his regret that when Maitreya appears in the world, people tend not to recognize. And then that kind of stuck, and he became associated with Maitreya Bodhisattva. So another example that Teigen gives is Johnny Appleseed. I love this one. You know, Johnny Appleseed, he lived in the 19th century. He's from Pennsylvania, but he walked all around Ohio and Indiana, and he planted apple trees for people who didn't live there yet. People lived there, but people he was thinking about didn't live there yet. And he planted all these apple orchards for the settlers, because he figured they were going to need something when they got there. And this thing was planting apple trees. And he was kind of eccentric, like Cote. And he would sometimes walk around wearing a gunny sack, and sometimes he'd have like a pie tin on his head. And he loved to play with the kids, and the kids loved him. So he's got a really strong Cote energy. But he's also, you know, he's Maitreya. He's looking towards the future. What's going to happen? So those are a few of the best known bodhisattvas. And the reason that I'm telling you about them is so that you can recognize them when you see them in the world. You start noticing people who are just conducting bodhisattva business, usually without knowing. Usually without knowing. And it's, you know, it's not so important to be able to identify a particular bodhisattva as to appreciate how important they are in the world. You know, how important it is for each one of us to care for each other. So I want to close with a poem, but first I want to read the last paragraph of Teigen's book. And he says, "We are all wonderful, unique creatures with our own combinations of talents, strengths, and insights. We can decide to do our best to enact our innermost intentions, our deepest selves, while also seeing others as prospective bodhisattvas. And finally, we must go beyond the models and examples that inspire us, beyond all the archetypes, and just fully be ourselves. With so much trouble in the world, it's important that we find ways of working together to sustain our intention. The crucial vow of bodhisattva practice is just to continue to awaken and to care for all beings." And then I have a poem. This is by Welch, and it's called the Maitreya poem, but it really, it refers to Maitreya, but it's kind of about all the bodhisattvas. So this is it. He says, "At last in America, Maitreya, the coming Buddha, will be our guide, leader, and at last will not be powerful and will not be alone. Take it as simple prophecy. Look into the cleared eyes of so many thousands, young, and think, maybe that one, or that one. Look out. The secret is looking out, and never forgetting there are phony ones and lost ones and foolish ones. Know this." I'm going to cry. "Maitreya walks our streets right now. Each one is one. There are so many of them. Look out for him, for her, for them, for these will break America as Christ cracked Rome." And just tonight, another one got born. Those are our bodhisattvas. I forgot to mention, I have another one on the altar. When people die, we put their pictures on the altar. So right now my mom's picture is up there. And when we cleaned out her room at the nursing home, we put the statue of Mary. And in my mind, Mary is Avalokita. So I brought her up. Thank you. Mary's holding a little baby, and Anne is holding a little baby Rosemary. So stop by and say hello. Thank you. Anybody want to talk about their bodhisattvas, or do you have any questions? Things you want to say?
Yeah. I'm so excited that you went down to see Kuan Yin. And I did that a few years ago. And anyway, has the opportunity to go to Kansas City. And what's the name of the museum?
The Nelson Atkins.
The Nelson Atkins Museum. She's amazing. And like you said, we were there with a friend and we were there for almost an hour.
Yeah. And
you just feel the presence and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And she's my favorite Bodhisattva. And in that pose, she's my favorite Bodhisattva. And I bought one, I looked online until I found one and I have one about this big in that same in-row pose.
Oh,
and she's on the altar.
Oh,
So I really love her. I love Manju Tree.
yeah.
I have a statue of him with a sword, ready to cut through the BS.
Should the BS appear?
So I really appreciate your talk because I'm not as familiar with all of them. I mean, I Manju Tree and Kuan Yin, although I can't say that without slowing way down.
And
Those two I know a lot about. I've heard a lot about. I really appreciate you bringing up the other ones and which I've heard of but never heard much about.
yeah,
So that is going to be my goal. I wrote down the name of the book. And
Yep. Find it in the library.
Yeah,
That's pretty great.
thank you so much for your talk.
Oh, you're welcome.
Rosemary,
Yes.
hi. Thank you so much for this talk. What it reminds me of is I've been really feeling hopeless about the state of the world and telling people, you know, that I've stopped being as involved as I had been. Someone at the table talked about writing postcards, just encouraging people to vote. And I felt this change in my heart of from being hopeless to being and realizing that is something I can do. That is something I can do. And I really felt like she was really a bodhisattva for me. And now I've contacted the person she gave me and I'll get the postcards. And I can do something simple without going out and fighting with anybody or arguing with anybody or knocking on doors like I've done or other activities that I've done. And I feel very skeptical about the whole political situation in this country and in the world. But it doesn't mean that I'm not needed to do some positive action. And so that person was really a bodhisattva to me this week. So it's really, and I've experienced that a lot in my life. A series of people who just show up in my life at times when I'm in those kind of quandaries where I feel like I don't know what to do the next thing. And then somebody just shows up, you know, and that's happened for me all my life, you know, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you for this talk.
Another thing bodhisattvas all do is they show up to vote. Sometimes they're election judges. So thank you, Judy. Anything else? Yeah.
If you ever get to St. Louis, in there are there is, they also have a lot of that is.
Wow.
So also gonna say, I think it's making pretty fun. What class would we spend like 2 weeks?
You know, we did a practice period years ago on the bodhisattvas. We had done a practice period before on it, but yeah, you're right. It would be a great one. So if any of you out there are in St. Louis, there's a great bodhisattva Kuan Yin in there. The art museum here has amazing bodhisattvas. When you go up to the second floor on that great big landing, there's a whole bunch of really wonderful Kuan Yins. So I recommend it. They have a lot of Guanyins and Jizos, and Buddhas. But when you go to music, when you read the cards, it's very academic, and they refer to them as deities, which kind of makes me jump a little bit because I mean they are sometimes prayed to. You know, people pray to them or ask them for things. But when I think deity, I think God, and they aren't gods. They're bodhisattvas. We aren't gods that I know of. Anybody in here? But I know this bodhisattva. And T asked Ben about his book, about his Jizo. He's got some wonderful Jizos.
Also, I can tell you about these Jizos. So about 30 years ago, my mother made a series of bronze statues. She was casting bronze sculpture, and she made 4 small abstract objects that are just kind of like little lumps. And I went to Japan with my spouse, Colleen, this spring, and all over Japan, there are thousands and thousands of Jizo altars. And Jizo altars will often have faceless or unrecognizable figures. They're just kind of like lumps, just stones, but people make things for them. They care for them. So everywhere you go, you will see little altars with a Jizo, with a handmade red bib, and oftentimes a cap, and maybe some personal items which were probably put there for people who lost children. So Colleen came home, looked at the bronzes in our yard and said, those are Jizos, and they need this. I said, well, my mom made them, so we got to ask her. And, you know, Jizo is associated with children lost during and before childbirth, including aborted children, and there are rituals around Jizo in Japan. My mother lost a child 2 years before I was born. So I told her the story of Jizo, what they represent, and she was so excited. And now we have Jizos in our yard for all of you to come enjoy. Drop by our house. They have their little bibs on.
Gina,
Gina.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the talk. I appreciate it. Sorry, my voice is a little bad. I live in St. Louis. Where, what floor were those on that you're talking about?
You know what floor they were on? I don't. You can ask at the information desk.
Yeah.
To the Bodhisattva.
Well, thank you very much.
I want to go down there now. Dang, don't tell me about any of them. Never been.
It's a good art. It's a good art museum.
It's a good one. Yeah, another really good one is for Asian art is of all things, the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. They have some pretty wonderful bodhisattvas there. Is there anybody else online who wants to say something? I love thinking about them celestial bodhisattvas. That's I see David, I know he's one. All right. Thank you for coming. Let's all chant the Bodhisattva vow together.